When I woke up that Tuesday morning in excruciating pain, clutching my chest and gasping for air, I never imagined that the person living under the same roof would be the one responsible for putting me in danger. What started as what I thought was just another bad flare-up of my chronic condition turned into a nightmare that exposed the true nature of someone I had trusted for 3 years.
I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from. And if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. My name is Marga, and I've been living with a rare autoimmune condition called systemic lupus erythematosus since I was 22. For those who don't know, lupus is like having your own immune system turn against you. It attacks your organs, joints, and tissues, causing inflammation, pain, and a whole host of complications that can be life-threatening if not properly managed. The medication regimen that keeps me alive isn't simple. I take 12 different pills throughout the day, including a critical immunosuppressant called methotrexate that I have to take every Wednesday without fail. Missing even one dose can trigger a dangerous flare that could land me in the hospital within hours. My rheumatologist, Dr. Patterson, has drilled this into me since my diagnosis. Consistency with medication is literally the difference between living a relatively normal life and facing organ failure. I live in Portland, Oregon, in a modest two-bedroom house that I share with my husband Marcus and his younger sister Bethany. Marcus and I have been married for 4 years, and when Bethany lost her job as a marketing coordinator about 8 months ago, we offered to let her stay with us temporarily while she got back on her feet. What we thought would be a 2-month arrangement had stretched into nearly a year. But Marcus felt obligated to help his only sibling, especially since their parents had passed away in a car accident when they were both teenagers. Bethany had always been skeptical about my condition. From the moment Marcus first brought me home to meet his family, she had this look in her eyes like she thought I was putting on some kind of act. She never said it directly back then, but I could feel her judgment. When I'd have to cancel plans because of a flare-up, or when I'd need to rest during family gatherings, she'd roll her eyes or make little comments under her breath about how convenient my timing always seemed to be. Living together made her attitude much more obvious and, frankly, unbearable. She'd make snide remarks about how I always seemed to have something wrong with me. When I take my morning medications with breakfast, she'd watch me with this expression of disgust and disbelief. Once, she actually said, "Do you really need to take all those pills? It seems excessive. My friend Sarah says most doctors just prescribe stuff to make money."
The worst part was how she'd dismiss my symptoms entirely. If I mentioned feeling fatigued, she'd say I was just lazy. If I had joint pain that made it difficult to do household chores, she'd accuse me of making excuses to get out of responsibilities. She started calling me Princess Marga behind my back, though she didn't know I could hear her when she was on the phone with her friends, complaining about having to live with her dramatic sister-in-law who thinks she's dying all the time. Marcus tried to mediate, but he was caught in an impossible position. He loved his sister and felt responsible for her, but he also saw how her attitude was affecting me and our marriage. Every time I tried to talk to him about Bethany's behavior, he'd say things like, "She's just going through a rough time," or "She doesn't understand chronic illness. Maybe we should educate her." But Bethany showed no interest in learning or changing her perspective. The tension in our house had been building for months, but everything came to a head the weekend before that terrible Tuesday. Bethany had been complaining about our grocery bills, claiming that my expensive health food was costing too much money. She was referring to the anti-inflammatory foods my doctor recommended, things like wild salmon, organic vegetables, and specific supplements that helped manage my symptoms. "Maybe if you ate normal food like everyone else instead of this overpriced health nut stuff, we could actually afford to go out once in a while," she said during what started as a casual conversation about weekend plans. I tried to explain that my diet was part of my treatment plan, prescribed by my rheumatologist as a way to reduce inflammation and potentially lower my need for stronger medications, but she just laughed. "Treatment plan? For what? Being picky? I swear, Marga, you've got an excuse for everything. Next, you'll be telling me you need special air to breathe.
That comment pushed me over the edge. I'd been patient with her attitude for months, but having my legitimate medical needs mocked was too much. I told her that her ignorance about chronic illness was showing, and that her constant negativity was making an already difficult situation worse for everyone in the house. She didn't take that well. Difficult situation? The only difficult thing about this situation is having to pretend your little victim act is real. You know what I think? I think you're addicted to attention and sympathy, and you've convinced Marcus and everyone else that you're some kind of delicate flower who needs special treatment. Marcus wasn't home when this argument happened. He was at his Saturday basketball league. So it was just the two of us in the kitchen, finally having the confrontation that had been brewing for months. I tried to stay calm and explain that lupus is a real, diagnosable condition with objective medical tests and documented symptoms. I even offered to show her some educational materials from the Lupus Foundation. But Bethany was on a roll. You know what I think about your condition? I think it's all in your head. I think you've read about symptoms online and convinced yourself you have them. I mean, come on, you're 31 years old and you act like you're 90. Real sick people don't spend this much time talking about being sick. The irony of that statement hit me hard. I actually spent most of my energy trying not to talk about my condition, minimizing my symptoms around others to avoid exactly this kind of reaction. But apparently, even my attempts to downplay my illness weren't enough for Bethany. She continued her rant. And all those pills you take, half of them are probably placebos anyway. I bet if you stopped taking them for a week, you'd feel exactly the same. Better even, because you wouldn't have all those chemicals messing with your system. That's when alarm bells started going off in my head. The way she said stopped taking them had a strange emphasis that made me uncomfortable. But I was so angry and hurt by her accusations that I didn't fully process the implication at the time. I told her she had no idea what she was talking about, and that her opinions about my medical care were not only wrong, but dangerous. I explained that stopping immunosuppressant medications abruptly could trigger a serious flare that could damage my organs permanently. She just smirked. Sure, Marga, whatever you need to tell yourself. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying the conversation and feeling more and more upset about living in a house where someone actively resented my existence and believed I was faking a serious medical condition. I considered asking Marcus to choose between his sister and his wife, but I knew that wasn't fair to put him in that position. Sunday and Monday passed relatively quietly. Bethany avoided me, which was actually a relief. Marcus sensed something was wrong, but I didn't want to rehash the entire argument and make him feel like he had to pick sides. I just told him that Bethany and I had disagreed about something and we were giving each other space. Monday night, I went through my usual routine of organizing my medications for the week. I have a large pill organizer with compartments for morning, afternoon, and evening doses for each day. It's a system that's worked perfectly for 3 years. I fill it every Monday night, and it ensures I never miss a dose or accidentally double dose. As I was filling Tuesday's compartments, I noticed that my bottle of methotrexate seemed lighter than usual. I counted the remaining pills and realized I was running low earlier than expected. I made a mental note to call Dr. Patterson's office in the morning to request a refill, but I had enough for the rest of the week, so I wasn't worried. I took my Tuesday morning medications as usual, along with breakfast, and went about my day. I work as a freelance graphic designer, mostly from home, which is perfect for managing my condition since I can adjust my schedule around my symptoms and medical appointments. But by Tuesday afternoon, I was starting to feel off. It was subtle at first, just a general sense of unease and fatigue that seemed different from my usual lupus-related tiredness. By evening, I was experiencing joint stiffness that felt more intense than normal, and I had developed a low-grade fever. I went to bed early, thinking rest would help, but I woke up around 2 a.m. with severe chest pain and difficulty breathing. At first, I thought it might be anxiety. I'd been stressed about the situation with Bethany, but the pain was getting worse, and my heart was racing in a way that scared me. I lay there for an hour, trying to decide if I was overreacting. The last thing I wanted was to wake up Marcus and end up in the ER over what might be a panic attack, especially with Bethany in the house, ready to use it as more evidence that I was dramatic and attention-seeking.
But by 4 a.m., I knew something was seriously wrong. The chest pain was radiating to my back and shoulder, I was having trouble catching my breath, and I felt like I was going to pass out. I gently shook Marcus awake and told him I thought we needed to go to the hospital. He took one look at me and didn't hesitate. My skin had a grayish pallor, I was sweating despite feeling cold, and I could barely speak in full sentences because of the breathing difficulty. He helped me get dressed and got the car keys while I grabbed my purse and insurance cards. The drive to Portland General Hospital felt like it took forever, though it was probably only 15 minutes. Marcus kept asking if I wanted him to call an ambulance, but I was still hoping this was something manageable that wouldn't require emergency intervention. We didn't wake Bethany before leaving. Marcus left her a quick text saying we'd gone to the hospital and would update her when we knew more. Looking back, that decision to leave quietly would turn out to be more significant than we realized at the time. The emergency department at Portland General was bustling with activity, even at 4:30 in the morning. The triage nurse took one look at my symptoms, chest pain, difficulty breathing, fever, and my medical history, and immediately classified me as a priority. Within minutes, I was hooked up to monitors and having blood drawn for lab work.
Dr. Chen, the attending physician, was thorough and methodical. She listened carefully as I described my symptoms and medical history, asking detailed questions about my medication regimen, recent stress levels, and any changes in my routine. When I mentioned that I'd been taking my medications exactly as prescribed and hadn't missed any doses, she made a note in my chart. The initial tests were concerning. My inflammatory markers were through the roof. My C-reactive protein level was 15 times higher than normal, and my SED rate indicated severe systemic inflammation. My white blood cell count was dangerously low, which Dr. Chen explained could indicate that my immune system was either severely suppressed or under attack. A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now, back to where we left off. Mrs. Rodriguez, she said, using my married name, these results suggest you're experiencing a serious lupus flare, but the severity is unusual given that you've been consistent with your immunosuppressive therapy. We need to run more comprehensive tests. Marcus sat beside my bed, holding my hand and looking increasingly worried as more medical staff came and went. The chest x-rays showed fluid around my lungs, and the EKG revealed some irregular rhythms that required immediate attention. Dr. Chen ordered an echocardiogram to check for pericarditis, inflammation around the heart that can be a life-threatening complication of lupus. While we waited for the cardiac ultrasound, Dr. Chen asked me to walk her through my exact medication routine once more. I explained my Monday night pill organizing system and how I'd taken Tuesday's morning dose as usual. She seemed puzzled by something and asked if I'd experienced any stomach upset, nausea, or other side effects recently. Actually, now that you mention it, I did feel a little queasy yesterday afternoon, but I thought it was just stress, I told her. Dr. Chen exchanged a look with the nurse that I couldn't quite interpret. Mrs. Rodriguez, I want to run a specific blood test to check the levels of methotrexate in your system. It's unusual for someone on a stable dose to have such severe breakthrough symptoms. The cardiac ultrasound confirmed pericarditis, and Dr. Chen immediately started me on high-dose IV steroids to reduce the inflammation. The relief was gradual but noticeable. Within an hour, the crushing chest pain had eased enough that I could take deeper breaths. Marcus had been texting updates to Bethany throughout the morning, but her responses were oddly brief. Just things like, okay, and hope she feels better. No questions about what was happening, no offer to come to the hospital, no expression of concern beyond those generic pleasantries. Around 10 a.m., Dr. Chen returned with results that changed everything. She pulled up a chair next to my bed and had a serious expression that immediately put me on high alert. Marga, we have a problem. Your methotrexate levels are essentially undetectable. For someone who claims to have taken their dose yesterday morning, we should be seeing therapeutic levels in your bloodstream. Either your body isn't absorbing the medication properly, which would be highly unusual given your history, or you haven't been taking it. I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. Dr. Chen, I swear to you, I took my pills yesterday morning just like I have every morning for 3 years.
I watched myself take them with my breakfast. She nodded thoughtfully. I believe you think you took them, but the blood doesn't lie. We're going to need to figure out what's going on here because missing doses of methotrexate can be extremely dangerous, as you're experiencing right now. Marcus spoke up for the first time in hours. Is it possible that the pills themselves are the problem? Like, could they be defective or expired? Dr. Chen considered this. It's possible, though highly unlikely with medications from a reputable pharmacy. Marga, do you have your pill bottles with you? I realized I'd grabbed my purse but hadn't thought to bring my medications. They're at home in the medicine cabinet. Marcus, could you go get them? I want Dr. Chen to see exactly what I've been taking. Marcus hesitated. Are you sure you'll be okay while I'm gone? I'll be here with her, Dr. Chen assured him, and we need those medications to figure out what's happening. After Marcus left, Dr. Chen sat down again and asked me about my home situation. I found myself telling her about Bethany's attitude toward my condition, her belief that I was faking my symptoms, and our argument over the weekend. Has anyone else had access to your medications? She asked carefully. The question hit me like a lightning bolt. I hadn't even considered the possibility, but suddenly Bethany's comments about me not needing all those pills took on a much more sinister meaning. My sister-in-law lives with us, I said slowly. She's made it clear she thinks I'm faking my condition, but surely she wouldn't. I mean, that would be incredibly dangerous. Dr. Chen's expression grew more serious. Marga, what I'm about to say might be difficult to hear, but we see cases of medication tampering more often than you'd think. Usually, it's well-meaning family members who don't understand the importance of the medications, but sometimes it's more deliberate. The fact that your methotrexate levels are completely absent while your other medication levels appear normal is very suspicious.
While we waited for Marcus to return, Dr. Chen ordered additional tests to check for any permanent damage from the severe flare. The echocardiogram had shown some concerning changes in my heart function, and she wanted to make sure we caught any kidney involvement early. The IV steroids were helping with the immediate symptoms, but Dr. Chen explained that recovering from this level of systemic inflammation could take weeks, even with aggressive treatment. If someone has been interfering with your medications, they've put you at risk for organ damage that could be permanent, she said bluntly. Marcus returned about an hour later, carrying a plastic bag with all my pill bottles. Dr. Chen immediately noticed something odd about the methotrexate bottle. It was fuller than it should have been if I'd been taking the prescribed weekly dose. She counted the pills carefully. Marga, according to the pharmacy date on this bottle, you should have about 18 pills left if you've been taking them as prescribed. There are 34 pills in here. My heart sank as the implications became clear. Someone had been removing my methotrexate from my weekly pill organizer and putting the pills back in the original bottle. Since I only handled the bottle once a week to refill my organizer, I wouldn't have noticed the count was wrong. Marcus looked confused. What does this mean? Dr. Chen's voice was carefully controlled. It means someone has been deliberately preventing Marga from taking her most critical medication. This isn't an accident or a misunderstanding. This is intentional sabotage that could have killed her. The room fell silent except for the beeping of my heart monitor. Marcus stared at the pill bottle in disbelief, while I felt a mix of vindication and horror. I'd been right about taking my medications, but someone I trusted had been systematically undermining my health. We need to call the police, Dr. Chen said firmly. This constitutes assault, possibly attempted murder depending on the intent. And Marga, you're going to need to be admitted for at least 48 hours while we get your inflammation under control and monitor for any complications. Marcus finally found his voice. Bethany, it had to be Bethany. She's the only other person in the house, and she's made it clear she thinks Marga is faking everything. Dr. Chen nodded grimly. We'll need to document everything carefully. The good news is that we caught this before there was permanent organ damage. The bad news is that whoever did this needs to face consequences, or they might try again. As the reality of the situation sank in, I felt a strange mix of emotions. Relief that I wasn't going crazy, that my body hadn't suddenly stopped responding to treatment. Anger that someone had deliberately put my life at risk. And fear about what this meant for my marriage and my living situation.
Dr. Chen was already making calls to hospital security and preparing to contact the authorities. What had started as a medical emergency was about to become a criminal investigation. Detective Sarah Morrison arrived at the hospital 2 hours later, a seasoned investigator from Portland Police Bureau's Domestic Crimes Unit. She was professional but warm, immediately putting me at ease despite the surreal circumstances of giving a statement from a hospital bed. Mrs. Rodriguez, I know this is overwhelming, but I need you to walk me through the timeline of events leading up to this incident, she said, pulling out a digital recorder. Dr. Chen has filled me in on the medical evidence, but I need your perspective on the family dynamics. I recounted everything. Bethany's months of skepticism, her comments about my medications being unnecessary, the weekend argument where she specifically mentioned me stopping my pills. Detective Morrison took detailed notes, asking follow-up questions about specific statements Bethany had made. Has she ever directly threatened to interfere with your medications? The detective asked. I had to think carefully. Not in those exact words, but she said she thought I'd feel better if I stopped taking them. And the way she said it during our argument felt deliberate. Marcus was visibly struggling with the reality of the situation. I can't believe Bethany would do something this dangerous. I mean, she's been difficult, but this could have killed Marga. Detective Morrison nodded. That's exactly why we take these cases seriously. Medication tampering can be charged as assault, reckless endangerment, or in extreme cases, attempted murder. The severity depends on intent and knowledge of consequences. While we talked, hospital security had already retrieved surveillance footage from the corridors near our house's pharmacy pickup location. Dr. Chen had also arranged for the remaining methotrexate pills to be tested to confirm they were genuine and hadn't been replaced with placebos. I need to ask you both not to contact your sister-in-law until we can arrange a proper interview, Detective Morrison instructed. We don't want to give her time to dispose of evidence or coordinate a story. The detective left to begin her investigation, and I was transferred to a regular room for continued monitoring. The steroids were working, but Dr. Chen wanted to observe my heart and kidney function for at least another day. Marcus stayed with me, but I could see him wrestling with conflicting emotions about his sister. Around 4 p.m., my phone started buzzing with text messages from Bethany. The first few seemed innocent enough, asking how I was feeling, when we'd be home. But as the afternoon wore on, her messages became more frequent and insistent. Why isn't Marcus answering his phone? What's taking so long at the hospital? Did you tell them about your medications? Sometimes doctors need to know everything you're taking. That last message sent chills down my spine. It felt like she was trying to plant seeds for her defense, establishing that medication issues might be my fault rather than sabotage. Marcus showed me his phone. He had similar messages, along with increasingly frantic calls that he'd been ignoring on Detective Morrison's advice. She's never been this persistent about checking on you before, he observed grimly. By evening, Detective Morrison returned with updates that painted a disturbing picture. The pharmacy surveillance showed Bethany visiting our local CVS 3 times in the past month, each time on days when I would have been filling my weekly pill organizer. She'd purchased small items, gum, magazines, bottled water, but had lingered near the pharmacy counter much longer than necessary. We also found something interesting in your trash, the detective revealed. Your garbage pickup is on Wednesdays, correct? Well, buried in this week's bag, we found a small plastic container with methotrexate residue. It looks like she was collecting the pills she removed and disposing of them right before trash day. The evidence was becoming overwhelming, but Marcus still seemed to need more proof. Maybe there's another explanation. Maybe she was trying to help somehow, like organizing medications differently. Detective Morrison's expression was patient but firm. Mr. Rodriguez, I understand this is your sister, but the pattern of behavior we're seeing isn't accidental or well-intentioned. She specifically targeted the most critical medication while leaving others untouched. That suggests knowledge and intent. The next morning brought the confrontation I'd been dreading. Detective Morrison had arranged to interview Bethany at our house, and I was discharged from the hospital just in time to be present when she arrived with backup officers. Bethany was in the living room when we walked in, and her immediate reaction told us everything we needed to know. Instead of expressing relief that I was okay or asking about my condition, her first words were defensive. Before anyone says anything, I want you to know that I never touched Marcus' medications. If something's wrong with them, it's not my fault. Marcus and I exchanged glances. Nobody had accused her of anything yet, but she'd immediately jumped to denying medication tampering. Detective Morrison was masterful in her approach. She started with general questions about household routines, Bethany's observations about my health, and her understanding of my medical needs. Bethany's answers were consistent with her previous attitude. She believed I was exaggerating my symptoms and taking unnecessary medications. In your opinion, would Marga be healthier if she took fewer medications? The detective asked. Absolutely, Bethany replied without hesitation. I think she's probably addicted to some of them, and her body would heal naturally if she gave it a chance. All those chemicals can't be good for anyone. Did you ever consider helping her by reducing her medication intake? This is where Bethany made her critical mistake. Instead of denying any involvement, she launched into a justification. Look, if someone you cared about was poisoning themselves with unnecessary drugs, wouldn't you try to help them see reason? I mean, she takes 12 different pills every day. That's not normal for someone her age. Detective Morrison leaned forward. How specifically did you try to help her see reason? Bethany realized she'd walked into a trap, but it was too late to backtrack. I may have suggested that she tried going without some of them for a few days, just to see if she actually needed them or if it was all psychological. And how did you suggest this? The room fell silent. Bethany looked around at us all. Marcus horrified, me barely containing my anger, Detective Morrison waiting patiently, and the backup officers taking notes. I thought if she didn't notice that some pills were missing, it would prove that she didn't really need them. I was trying to help her realize that she was stronger than she thought. Marcus exploded. Bethany, what the hell were you thinking? Do you have any idea what you could have done to her? She could have died. But she didn't, Bethany shot back. And look, she's fine now. This proves my point. Her body fought off whatever was wrong without all those chemicals. Detective Morrison intervened. Ms. Rodriguez, do you understand that your sister-in-law was hospitalized with life-threatening complications specifically because you removed her medication? For the first time, doubt crept into Bethany's voice. Life-threatening? The doctor said she just had inflammation. That's not life-threatening. Dr. Chen had provided Detective Morrison with a detailed report about my condition and prognosis. The detective read from it now. Severe pericarditis with cardiac involvement, acute kidney stress markers, and systemic inflammation that could have led to organ failure within 24 to 48 hours without intervention. The attending physician confirmed that missing doses of immunosuppressive medication directly caused these complications. Bethany's face went pale. I don't think she'd truly understood the potential consequences of her actions until that moment. I didn't know it would be that serious, she whispered. I thought she'd just feel tired or maybe have some joint pain. I didn't think. I mean, she always complains about feeling bad anyway. How many pills did you remove and over what time period? Detective Morrison asked. Bethany's confession came in pieces. She'd been removing my methotrexate tablets every Tuesday morning after I'd filled my pill organizer, replacing them in the original bottle to avoid detection. She'd been doing this for 6 weeks, convinced that I'd eventually admit I felt the same with or without the medication. I kept a record, she said, pulling out her phone. I wanted to document that she wasn't getting worse without the pills so I could show Marcus that I was right about her faking it. The phone contained photos and notes tracking my daily activities, mood, and any symptoms she'd observed. It was a chilling document that showed premeditation rather than impulsive action. Detective Morrison placed Bethany under arrest for reckless endangerment and assault. As the handcuffs clicked into place, Bethany finally seemed to grasp the magnitude of what she'd done. Marcus, I'm sorry. I really thought I was helping. I never wanted her to get hurt. But Marcus had already turned away, his trust in his sister shattered beyond repair. As the police car drove away with Bethany in custody, I felt a complex mix of emotions. Justice was being served, but the cost to our family would be long-lasting. The person who was supposed to be part of our support system had become the greatest threat to my health and safety. The evidence was clear, the confession was recorded, and the consequences were just beginning. The days following Bethany's arrest were a whirlwind of legal proceedings, medical follow-ups, and emotional upheaval that tested our marriage in ways I never anticipated. Marcus was devastated, cycling between guilt for bringing his sister into our home and anger at the betrayal of trust that had nearly cost me my life. The district attorney, Jennifer Walsh, contacted us within 48 hours to discuss the charges and what we could expect moving forward. She was straightforward about the case's complexity. While the evidence was overwhelming, prosecuting family members for medication tampering often involved nuanced legal arguments about intent and harm. The fact that she kept detailed records actually works in our favor, DA Walsh explained during our meeting at her downtown office. It demonstrates premeditation and ongoing decision-making, not a momentary lapse in judgment. However, her defense will likely argue that she genuinely believed she was helping, which could reduce the charges. Marcus struggled with whether to testify against his sister. I know what she did was wrong, but she's all the family I have left. Our parents are gone, and now this. I feel like I'm losing everyone. I understood his conflict, but I couldn't let his emotional turmoil overshadow the seriousness of what had happened. Marcus, she didn't just hurt me. She violated the trust of our marriage, our home, and put my life at risk. If we don't hold her accountable, what message does that send? The legal process moved surprisingly quickly. Bethany's public defender, Robert Kim, attempted to negotiate a plea deal that would involve probation and mandatory counseling rather than jail time. But DA Walsh was firm that the case warranted serious consequences. Ms. Rodriguez's actions resulted in hospitalization and could have caused permanent organ damage or death. The state cannot accept a plea that doesn't incarceration. Meanwhile, my recovery was more complicated than Dr. Chen had initially hoped. The severe flare had triggered secondary complications that required ongoing monitoring. My kidney function showed signs of stress, and the cardiac inflammation had caused some scarring that might be permanent. The good news is that we caught everything early enough to prevent major damage, Dr. Chen explained during a follow-up appointment. But your immune system has been through significant trauma. We need to be extra careful about your medication compliance and stress management going forward. The irony wasn't lost on me. Bethany's attempt to prove I didn't need medication had instead demonstrated just how critical my treatment regimen truly was. 3 weeks after the arrest, we received an unexpected visitor. Bethany's former employer, Amanda Fisher, reached out wanting to speak with us privately. She'd seen the news coverage and had information she thought might be relevant to the case.
I need to tell you why Bethany really lost her job, Amanda said when she came to our house. It wasn't downsizing like she told you. We had to terminate her because she was interfering with a coworker's medical accommodations. The story that emerged was chilling in its similarity to what had happened to me. Bethany had worked alongside a woman with diabetes who used a company refrigerator to store her insulin. Bethany had repeatedly moved the insulin to different locations, claiming the medical supplies didn't belong in a shared food space. When the woman had a severe blood sugar episode at work, we reviewed security footage and discovered Bethany's interference, Amanda explained. She insisted she was trying to help by encouraging her coworker to rely less on medication and more on natural regulation through diet and exercise. This revelation provided crucial context for the prosecution. Bethany's behavior toward me wasn't an isolated incident born from family frustration. It was part of a pattern of interfering with others' medical care based on her misguided beliefs about medication and illness. DA Walsh immediately subpoenaed Bethany's employment records and contacted her former coworker, who agreed to testify about the workplace incident. The case was building into something much stronger than a simple family dispute. Marcus was shaken by this new information.
She never told me about losing her job for that reason. She said the company was eliminating positions due to budget cuts. How could she lie about something so important? Because she knew it would make her look bad, I replied, and because she probably didn't think she'd done anything wrong in either situation. The preliminary hearing was scheduled for 6 weeks after the arrest. Marcus and I both provided victim impact statements describing how Bethany's actions had affected our health, our marriage, and our sense of safety in our own home. Reading my statement aloud in court was emotionally difficult but necessary. Living with a chronic illness requires trust in your doctors, your medications, and your support system. When someone deliberately undermines that trust, they're not just attacking your health, they're attacking your ability to manage a life-threatening condition. The defendant's actions forced me to question my own reality and nearly cost me my life. Marcus's statement focused on the family betrayal. I invited my sister into our home because I believed family meant protecting and supporting each other. Instead, she used that trust to endanger my wife's life based on her own uninformed opinions about medical care. The person I thought I knew would never put anyone at risk this way. Bethany's defense strategy became apparent during the hearing. Her lawyer argued that she had acted out of genuine concern, citing her lack of medical education and her belief that she was helping. He painted her as a misguided but well-intentioned sister-in-law who didn't understand the consequences of her actions. My client sincerely believed that Mrs. Rodriguez was taking unnecessary medications, Robert Kim told the judge. While her methods were clearly wrong, her intent was to help someone she cared about become healthier. This is a case of ignorance, not malice. But DA Walsh was prepared for this defense. She presented the employment records, the detailed documentation Bethany had kept, and expert testimony from Dr. Chen about the specific dangers of methotrexate withdrawal for lupus patients. The defendant didn't simply suggest that Mrs. Rodriguez reduce her medication, DA Walsh argued. She secretly sabotaged critical medical treatment over a period of weeks, documented her actions, and continued even after Mrs. Rodriguez expressed symptoms of deteriorating health. This was not a momentary mistake, it was systematic undermining of medical care. The judge, Helen Vasquez, listened carefully to both sides before ruling that there was sufficient evidence for the case to proceed to trial. She denied the defense's motion to reduce the charges, stating that the pattern of behavior and potential for serious harm warranted the original charges of assault and reckless endangerment. Bethany was released on bail with strict conditions. She couldn't contact Marcus or me directly, couldn't come within 500 feet of our home, and had to surrender her passport. She was also required to attend mandatory counseling about chronic illness and medication compliance. The trial date was set for 3 months later. In the meantime, Marcus and I had to rebuild our sense of security and trust. We changed the locks on our house, installed a security system, and I began storing my medications in a locked box. But the psychological impact was harder to address. Every time I took my pills, I found myself double-checking the count in my organizer. Every minor symptom made me wonder if someone was interfering with me again. The hypervigilance was exhausting and added stress that my already compromised immune system didn't need. Marcus started individual therapy to process his feelings about his sister's betrayal and his guilt over not recognizing the warning signs. Our couples counselor helped us work through the strain that the situation had placed on our marriage. Trauma affects both of you differently, our therapist, Dr. Patricia Williams, explained. Marga experienced direct physical harm and medical sabotage. Marcus experienced betrayal by the last member of his immediate family. Both responses are valid and need attention. As we prepared for trial, I realized that this experience had fundamentally changed how I understood family, trust, and vulnerability. The person who was supposed to be part of our support network had become our greatest threat. But it has also shown me the strength of my marriage and the importance of advocating for my own health and safety. The legal battle was far from over, but we were determined to see it through to ensure that Bethany faced appropriate consequences for her dangerous actions. The trial began on a cold January morning in Multnomah County Circuit Court. Judge Vasquez presided over a packed courtroom. The case had garnered significant media attention due to its unusual nature and the broader implications for patients with chronic illnesses. Jury selection took 2 full days. DA Walsh was looking for jurors who could understand the seriousness of medication tampering, while the defense sought people who might sympathize with family members trying to help loved ones with medical issues. The final jury consisted of 8 women and 4 men, including 2 healthcare workers, a pharmacist, and several people who had personal experience with chronic illness in their families. The prosecution's opening statement was devastating in its clarity. DA Walsh methodically laid out the timeline of events, from Bethany's arrival in our home to her systematic removal of my life-saving medication. She emphasized the premeditation, evidenced by Bethany's detailed records, and the pattern of behavior from her previous workplace. Ladies and gentlemen, this case is about more than family conflict or misunderstanding, DA Walsh told the jury. This is about a defendant who decided she knew better than trained medical professionals and took it upon herself to secretly alter someone else's prescribed treatment regimen. The result was nearly fatal. Defense attorney Robert Kim took a different approach, focusing on Bethany's emotional state and lack of medical knowledge. He portrayed her as a grieving woman who had lost her parents young and was desperately trying to protect what she saw as her remaining family. Bethany Rodriguez watched her sister-in-law take handfuls of pills every day and genuinely believed those medications were causing more harm than good, he argued. Her actions were misguided, yes, but they came from a place of love and concern, not malice. The first week of testimony focused on establishing my medical history and the critical importance of methotrexate in managing lupus. Dr. Patterson, my rheumatologist, testified about the dangers of sudden medication discontinuation and the specific risks I faced. Methotrexate is not a medication you can simply stop taking, Dr. Patterson explained to the jury. For patients with severe lupus like Mrs. Rodriguez, missing even a few doses can trigger life-threatening complications. It's one of the reasons we monitor these patients so closely. Dr. Chen's testimony was particularly powerful. She walked the jury through my emergency room presentation, the diagnostic process that revealed the medication tampering, and the potential long-term consequences of the severe flare I'd experienced. In 30 years of emergency medicine, I've seen many cases of medication noncompliance, Dr. Chen testified. But this was different. The patient insisted she was taking her medications correctly, and her detailed knowledge of her condition made me believe her. When the blood tests revealed no trace of methotrexate, we knew something was seriously wrong. The prosecution also called Amanda Fisher, Bethany's former employer, who testified about the workplace incident involving the diabetic coworker. Her testimony established a pattern of behavior that undermined the defense's claim that this was an isolated incident born from family concern. The defendant repeatedly interfered with a coworker's medical accommodations, despite being told to stop, Amanda testified. When confronted, she insisted she was trying to help by encouraging less reliance on medication. The similarity to the current case is striking. But it was Detective Morrison's testimony that proved most damaging to the defense. She presented the physical evidence, the pill counts, the surveillance footage, the documented photos Bethany had taken, along with her recordings from her confession. The defendant admitted to systematically removing medication over a 6-week period, Detective Morrison told the jury. She kept detailed records of her actions and the victim's condition. This wasn't a momentary lapse in judgment. It was ongoing, deliberate interference with medical treatment. When the prosecution played the recording of Bethany's confession, several jurors visibly reacted to her admission that she'd been documenting my condition to prove I didn't need the medication. The cold, calculated nature of her actions was impossible to dismiss as mere family concern. The defense's case began with character witnesses, former coworkers who described Bethany as caring and well-intentioned, friends who testified about her devotion to family, and her childhood neighbor who spoke about the trauma of losing her parents. The strategy was clearly aimed at generating sympathy for her. But their key witness was Dr. Michael Harrison, a naturopathic physician who testified about the potential side effects of immunosuppressive medications and the benefits of reducing pharmaceutical interventions when possible. Many patients are over-medicated in our current healthcare system, Dr. Harrison testified. It's understandable that family members might question whether all medications are truly necessary. DA Walsh's cross-examination of Dr. Harrison was surgical in its precision. She established that he wasn't licensed to treat lupus patients, had never reviewed my specific medical records, and wasn't qualified to comment on the appropriateness of my treatment regimen. Dr. Harrison, are you suggesting that family members should secretly alter prescribed medications based on their personal beliefs about healthcare? She asked.
Of course not, he replied. I'm simply saying that questioning medication necessity isn't inherently unreasonable. But secretly removing life-saving medication without the patient's knowledge, that would be unreasonable, wouldn't it? Yes, that would be inappropriate and dangerous. When Bethany finally took the stand in her own defense, the courtroom was silent with anticipation. Robert Kim led her through her version of events, emphasizing her genuine belief that she was helping me and her lack of understanding about the severity of lupus. I watched Marga struggle every day, taking all those pills and still feeling sick, Bethany testified tearfully. I thought if I could just show her that she didn't need all of them, maybe she could get better naturally. I never wanted to hurt her. But DA Walsh's cross-examination exposed the flaws in Bethany's narrative. She confronted her with the detailed records she'd kept, the deliberate timing of her actions, and her failure to discuss her concerns with Marcus or suggest I consult with my doctors. Ms. Rodriguez, you testified that you were trying to help your sister-in-law, but you never actually talked to her about your concerns regarding her medications, did you? I tried, but she wouldn't listen. She was convinced the doctors were right. So instead of respecting her autonomy over her own medical care, you decided to secretly alter her treatment? I thought if she could see that she felt the same without some of the pills, without her knowledge or consent? I was trying to help. By lying to her? By hiding your actions? By putting her life at risk? Bethany's composure cracked under the relentless questioning. I didn't know it would be life-threatening. I thought she might feel tired or have some joint pain, but I didn't think she could die. But you never asked a medical professional about the risks, did you? You never researched what happens when lupus patients stop taking methotrexate? No, I should have. Instead, you made a unilateral decision about someone else's healthcare based on your personal beliefs about medication? I was scared for her, all those chemicals going into her body every day. Scared enough to secretly sabotage her treatment, but not scared enough to have an honest conversation about your concerns? By the end of cross-examination, Bethany's defense had largely collapsed. Her admission that she'd never researched the risks of her actions, never consulted medical professionals, and never gave me the opportunity to address her concerns directly undermined any claim that her actions were reasonable or well-intentioned. The prosecution's rebuttal was brief but effective. They called Dr. Patterson back to the stand to explain exactly what could have happened if my condition had gone untreated for much longer. Mrs. Rodriguez was hours away from potential kidney failure and cardiac complications that could have been fatal, he testified. The defendant's actions created a medical emergency that required immediate intervention to prevent permanent organ damage or death. Closing arguments began on a Friday afternoon. DA Walsh summarized the evidence methodically, emphasizing the systematic nature of Bethany's actions and the severe consequences that resulted. The defendant wants you to believe this was about family concern and medical ignorance, she told the jury. But the evidence shows deliberate, ongoing sabotage of life-saving medical treatment. She kept records, she disposed of evidence, she lied about her actions, even as the victim's health deteriorated. This wasn't love, this was reckless endangerment that nearly killed an innocent woman. Robert Kim's closing focused on Bethany's emotional state and her genuine belief that she was helping. He asked the jury to consider her intentions rather than just the consequences of her actions. Bethany Rodriguez made a terrible mistake, but it came from a place of caring, not malice. She's not a criminal. She's a woman who lost her way trying to help someone she loved.
But as the jury filed out to begin deliberations, I felt confident that the evidence had spoken for itself. The systematic nature of Bethany's actions, the documented premeditation, and the near-fatal consequences made it clear that this was more than a simple mistake or family misunderstanding. After 2 days of deliberation, we were about to learn whether justice would be served. The jury deliberation lasted 18 hours across 2 days. Marcus and I waited anxiously in a nearby coffee shop, surrounded by reporters and family friends who had come to support us. Every time my phone buzzed with a text or call, my heart raced, thinking it might be news from the courthouse. DA Walsh had warned us that juries could be unpredictable, especially in cases involving family members. Sometimes jurors identify with the defendant's situation and focus more on intentions than actions, she'd explained, but the evidence in this case is overwhelming. On Wednesday afternoon, the court clerk called to inform us that the jury had reached a verdict. The walk back to the courthouse felt surreal. Media crews lined the steps, and I could see Bethany arriving with her lawyer through a side entrance. She looked haggard and nervous, a stark contrast to the confident woman who had moved into our home nearly a year ago. Judge Vasquez called the court to order and asked the jury foreman, a retired teacher named Patricia Williams, to read the verdict. The courtroom was completely silent, except for the sound of my own heartbeat thundering in my ears. On the charge of assault in the 3rd degree, we find the defendant guilty. I felt Marcus squeeze my hand as relief washed over me, but the foreman continued. On the charge of reckless endangerment in the 1st degree, we find the defendant guilty. Bethany's face crumpled and she began crying silently. Her lawyer put a comforting hand on her shoulder, but the damage was done. The jury had rejected the defense's argument that her actions were motivated by love rather than recklessness. Judge Vasquez thanked the jury and scheduled sentencing for the following month. As court adjourned, DA Walsh approached us with a satisfied expression. The jury saw through the defense's emotional manipulation, she said. They understood that good intentions don't excuse dangerous actions that nearly killed someone. The sentencing hearing brought its own set of emotions. Bethany's lawyer presented character references and requested leniency, arguing that she had already learned from her mistakes and posed no future threat to society. Several friends and former colleagues testified about her volunteer work and generally kind nature. But when it came time for victim impact statements, the mood in the courtroom shifted dramatically. I had spent weeks preparing my words, wanting to convey not just the physical harm, but the deeper violation of trust that had occurred. Your Honor, the defendant didn't just endanger my life. She shattered my sense of safety in my own home, I read from my prepared statement. For 6 weeks, I trusted her while she systematically sabotaged my medical treatment. I second-guessed my own symptoms, wondered if I was imagining my worsening condition, and questioned my sanity when my body began failing. The psychological trauma of that betrayal may take longer to heal than the physical complications. Marcus's statement focused on the family destruction. My sister was the last blood relative I had after our parents died. I invited her into our home because I believed family meant protection and support. Instead, she used my trust to nearly kill my wife. The person I thought I knew would never put anyone at risk, but the evidence showed me how wrong I was about someone I'd loved my entire life. Dr. Chen also provided a statement about the medical implications. The defendant's actions resulted in organ stress that has permanently affected Mrs. Rodriguez's health trajectory. While she survived this incident, her kidneys and heart show scarring that may contribute to complications decades from now. The defendant's interference with medical treatment has lifelong consequences. When Judge Vasquez asked Bethany if she wanted to make a statement before sentencing, she stood slowly and addressed the court with what seemed like genuine remorse. I want to apologize to Marga and Marcus for the pain I've caused. I thought I was helping, but I realize now how arrogant and dangerous my actions were. I should have talked to doctors, should have respected Marga's autonomy over her own medical care, should have trusted that she and her physicians knew what was best for her condition. My ignorance nearly cost Marga her life, and I will carry that guilt forever. She turned to face Marcus and me directly. I know I've destroyed our family, and I don't expect forgiveness. I just hope that someday you can both move forward with the pain I've caused." Judge Vasquez deliberated for nearly an hour before returning to announce the sentence. Her remarks were thoughtful and comprehensive, addressing both the seriousness of the crimes and the complexity of family dynamics. The defendant's actions represent a profound violation of trust that resulted in life-threatening harm to the victim, Judge Vasquez stated. While the court acknowledges that the defendant may have believed she was helping, ignorance of medical consequences does not excuse systematic interference with prescribed medical treatment. She sentenced Bethany to 2 years in state prison with the possibility of parole after 18 months, contingent on completing educational programs about chronic illness and medical ethics. Additionally, she was ordered to pay full restitution for my medical expenses and was prohibited from contacting Marcus or me for 5 years after her release. The court hopes this sentence sends a clear message that family members cannot take it upon themselves to alter someone else's medical treatment, regardless of their intentions, Judge Vasquez concluded. As bailiffs led Bethany away, she looked back once at Marcus, who was crying silently. The finality of the moment was overwhelming. His sister was going to prison, our family was permanently fractured, and nothing would ever return to the way it was before.
The months following the sentencing brought unexpected challenges. Marcus struggled with depression and guilt, despite repeated reassurances from our therapist that he wasn't responsible for his sister's choices. He'd lost his parents years ago, and now his sister was incarcerated for nearly killing his wife. The isolation weighed heavily on him. "Sometimes I wonder if there were signs I missed," he confided during one of our therapy sessions. "Was she always this controlling? Did she show these tendencies before and I just didn't notice?" Dr. Williams helped us understand that people can hide dangerous beliefs and behaviors even from those closest to them. Bethany's actions reflected her own internal struggles with control and medical skepticism, she explained. Marcus couldn't have predicted or prevented something he had no knowledge of. "My physical recovery was more complete than anyone had initially hoped. The organ damage was minimal, and my lupus returned to its baseline level of control once I resumed proper medication management. But the psychological impact lingered longer than expected. I found myself constantly checking my pill organizer, counting and recounting medications, and feeling anxious whenever I experienced even minor symptoms. The hypervigilance was exhausting and counterproductive for managing a chronic illness that required stress reduction. Trust is fundamental to medical care," Dr. Patterson observed during one of my follow-up appointments. "When that trust is violated, it affects everything: your relationship with medications, with symptoms, even with family members who are genuinely supportive." 6 months after the sentencing, we received an unexpected letter from Bethany's prison counselor. She had enrolled in every available educational program related to healthcare, chronic illness, and family communication. Her counselor reported significant progress in understanding the severity of her actions and the harm she had caused. The letter included a request for us to consider participating in a restorative justice program that would allow for supervised communication between Bethany and us. The program was designed to help both victims and offenders process the harm that had occurred and work toward healing. Marcus was torn about the opportunity. Part of him missed his sister and wanted to believe she had genuinely changed. But another part of him remained angry about the betrayal and protection of my safety and emotional well-being. "I need to know that she truly understands what she did," he said. "Not just that she's sorry for getting caught or sorry that there were consequences, but that she genuinely comprehends how her actions nearly killed you." After extensive discussion with Dr. Williams and careful consideration of our own emotional readiness, we decided to participate in the restorative justice program. The first session was scheduled for 8 months after Bethany began serving her sentence. The program took place in a neutral setting with trained mediators present. Bethany had visibly changed during her incarceration. She looked older, more serious, and carried herself with less of the defensive confidence that had characterized her behavior in our home. The conversation was difficult but ultimately healing.
Bethany demonstrated a depth of understanding about chronic illness that she had clearly never possessed before. She had educated herself about lupus, immunosuppressive medications, and the specific risks of methotrexate withdrawal. "I understand now that what I did was assault," she said directly to me. "I violated your autonomy, endangered your life, and betrayed your trust. I can't undo the harm I caused, but I want you to know that I spend every day working to understand how I could have been so dangerously wrong." The program didn't magically repair our family relationships, but it provided closure that the legal proceedings alone couldn't offer. We learned that Bethany's interference had stemmed from deep-seated fears about pharmaceutical dependency that traced back to watching our father struggle with prescription pain medication before his death. That context didn't excuse her actions, but it helped us understand the psychological foundation of her dangerous beliefs. More importantly, her participation in extensive education and therapy convinced us that she was unlikely to repeat similar behavior in the future. By the time this story reaches its conclusion, Bethany has served 15 months of her sentence and is eligible for parole in 3 months. Marcus and I have rebuilt our sense of security and trust, though our family dynamic will never return to what it was before. The experience taught us that the people closest to us can sometimes pose the greatest risks to our health and safety, and that chronic illness makes patients vulnerable in ways that extend far beyond the disease itself. But it also showed us the importance of advocacy, documentation, and trusting our own medical knowledge when others question our reality. Most importantly, it reinforced that medication compliance isn't just about following doctor's orders. It's about protecting yourself from those who think they know better than trained medical professionals and who might take dangerous actions based on their misguided beliefs. The notification came on a rainy Thursday morning in March, exactly 18 months after Bethany's sentencing. The Oregon Department of Corrections informed us that she had been granted parole and would be released the following week. Despite months of preparation through the restorative justice program, the reality of her impending freedom brought a flood of complex emotions.
Marcus received the call first and immediately contacted me at work. "She's getting out next Friday," he said, his voice carefully controlled. "Her parole officer wants to schedule a meeting with us to discuss the terms of her release and the no-contact order." The parole conditions were extensive and reassuring. Bethany would be living in a halfway house in Salem, about an hour south of Portland, for her first 6 months of freedom. She was required to maintain employment, attend weekly counseling sessions, and complete 200 hours of community service at a chronic illness support organization. Most importantly, the 5-year no-contact order remained in effect, meaning she couldn't approach our home, workplace, or attempt any communication without court approval. "We've reviewed her institutional record thoroughly," Parole Officer Janet Stevens explained during our meeting. "Ms. Rodriguez has been a model prisoner. She completed her GED, earned certifications in medical terminology and patient advocacy, and has been teaching literacy classes to other inmates. Her psychological evaluations show significant progress in understanding the impact of her actions." The week of Bethany's release coincided with my quarterly appointment with Dr. Patterson. During our discussion of my current health status, I mentioned the anxiety I was feeling about her return to freedom. "It's completely normal to feel apprehensive," Dr. Patterson assured me. "You experienced medical trauma at the hands of someone you trusted. Even with legal protections in place, the knowledge that she's no longer incarcerated can trigger those feelings of vulnerability." My lupus had remained stable throughout the legal proceedings and aftermath, though I developed what Dr. Patterson called medication vigilance syndrome, an hyper-awareness of my pill routine that sometimes bordered on obsessive behavior. I counted my medications multiple times daily, photographed my pill organizer before and after taking doses, and kept detailed logs that went far beyond what was medically necessary. "The good news is that your disease management is excellent," Dr. Patterson noted. "Your inflammatory markers are the best they've been in years, and there's no evidence of progression from the damage caused during the medication tampering incident. The psychological healing might take longer than the physical recovery, but you're making progress." 3 months after Bethany's release, we received an unexpected development. Her parole officer contacted us with a request that fell outside the normal parameters of the no-contact order. Bethany had written a letter that she wanted to share with us, not as direct communication, but as part of her ongoing therapy and accountability process. The letter was remarkable in its depth and specificity. She had clearly spent considerable time researching lupus, autoimmune diseases, and the specific medications that comprised my treatment regimen. But more than that, she had developed a comprehensive understanding of chronic illness advocacy and patient rights. I now understand that chronic illness patients face skepticism and dismissal from family, friends, employers, and sometimes even medical professionals, she wrote. My actions represented the worst possible violation of that trust and autonomy. I didn't just endanger Marga's physical health, I participated in the systemic invalidation that makes living with invisible illness so much harder. The letter continued with specific acknowledgments of harm that demonstrated genuine insight rather than surface-level apology. I realize now that my interference forced Marga to question her own symptoms and medical knowledge. I made her doubt her reality during a medical crisis, which is a form of psychological abuse. I also put Marcus in an impossible position between his family loyalty and his duty to protect his wife. What struck me most was her discussion of the broader implications. Through my community service work with the Lupus Foundation of Oregon, I've met dozens of people who face skepticism about their invisible illnesses. I've learned that family members questioning the validity of chronic conditions is tragically common, and my actions represent an extreme version of that harmful dynamic. Marcus read the letter several times before sharing his thoughts. It sounds like she's genuinely educated herself, not just about your specific condition, but about the whole experience of living with chronic illness. That's more understanding than she ever showed when she lived with us. The letter included a proposal that surprised us both. Bethany had worked with her therapist and the Lupus Foundation to develop an educational presentation about the dangers of family members interfering with medical treatment. She wanted to share her story at patient advocacy conferences and medical ethics seminars. I believe I have a responsibility to use my experience to prevent others from making similar dangerous mistakes, she wrote. If speaking publicly about my crimes can protect even one chronic illness patient from family interference, then some good might come from the terrible harm I caused. Dr. Williams, our couples therapist, helped us process this development during our next session. Bethany's request represents a form of accountability that goes beyond legal consequences, she observed. Public acknowledgement of wrongdoing and education about the harm caused can be meaningful steps in the healing process for everyone involved. After weeks of discussion, Marcus and I agreed to support Bethany's educational efforts with specific conditions. She would never mention our names or identifying details in her presentations. Any materials she developed would be reviewed by medical professionals and patient advocacy experts, and most importantly, her work would be supervised by established chronic illness organizations rather than being a solo effort. The first presentation took place at Oregon Health and Science University's Medical Ethics Symposium 6 months after her release. We didn't attend, but Dr. Patterson did and reported back that Bethany's presentation was thoughtful, educational, and appropriately focused on the harm caused rather than seeking sympathy for her situation. She clearly explained the medical dangers of immunosuppressant interruption and used her case as an example of how family members can cause serious harm through well-intentioned but ignorant interference, Dr. Patterson told us. The medical students and residents seemed genuinely impacted by the real-world consequences of the scenario she described. Over the following year, Bethany's educational work expanded to include presentations at nursing schools, patient advocacy conferences, and support groups for families dealing with chronic illness. The feedback was consistently positive. Healthcare professionals appreciated having a concrete example of medication tampering to discuss with patients and families. Meanwhile, Marcus and I continued rebuilding our lives and relationship. We eventually moved to a different neighborhood, partly for practical reasons, but also to create psychological distance from the house where the medication tampering had occurred. Our new home had better security features and a dedicated locked cabinet for my medications, precautions that might seem excessive but provided peace of mind. My career as a freelance graphic designer had actually benefited from the experience in an unexpected way. Several chronic illness advocacy organizations hired me to design educational materials, awareness campaigns, and patient resources.
Working on projects that helped other people with invisible illnesses felt like a way to transform my traumatic experience into something constructive. You've turned your victimization into advocacy, Dr. Williams observed during one of our final therapy sessions. That transformation doesn't erase the harm you experienced, but it demonstrates remarkable resilience and growth. The 2-year anniversary of the medication tampering incident passed quietly. Marcus and I marked it not as a day of trauma, but as a celebration of survival and recovery. My health remained stable, our marriage had grown stronger through the challenges we'd faced together, and we'd both developed new perspectives on trust, family, and medical autonomy. We received one final update about Bethany through official channels. She had completed her parole successfully and had been hired full-time by the Lupus Foundation of Oregon as a patient advocacy coordinator. Her job involved educating families about chronic illness, developing resources for newly diagnosed patients, and speaking publicly about the importance of medical autonomy and informed support. It's ironic, Marcus reflected. The person who nearly killed you through medical ignorance is now being paid to educate others about chronic illness. I guess people really can change, even after doing terrible things. I agreed, though I maintained my perspective that consequences and education, not forgiveness, had driven that change. She faced real accountability for her actions, and that accountability created the motivation for genuine learning and growth. If she'd just been excused because of family relationships or good intentions, I don't think she would have developed the same level of understanding. Today, more than 3 years after that terrifying Tuesday morning when I woke up in cardiac distress, I can honestly say that the experience has made me a stronger advocate for my own health and for other chronic illness patients. I'm more vigilant about my medical care, more assertive with healthcare providers, and more aware of the subtle ways that family members can undermine patient autonomy. The ordeal taught me that the people we trust most can sometimes pose the greatest dangers to our health and safety. It showed me that chronic illness makes patients vulnerable not just to disease progression, but to the misguided interventions of people who think they know better than medical professionals. But most importantly, it demonstrated that survival isn't just about medical treatment. It's about recognizing threats, documenting evidence, advocating for yourself, and demanding accountability when someone violates your trust and endangers your life. For anyone living with chronic illness, my story serves as both a warning and an encouragement. Be aware that your condition makes you vulnerable to people who question your reality or dismiss your medical needs. But also know that you have the power to protect yourself, seek justice when you're harmed, and transform even the most traumatic experiences into opportunities for advocacy and positive change. Trust your medical team, trust your symptoms, and most importantly, trust yourself when someone tries to convince you that your reality isn't valid. Your life may depend on that trust, just as mine did. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.